Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Marisol Nichols podcast. I am so proud of this beautiful film by director Mohit Ramchandani. That's a mouthful. Mohit Ramchandani, otherwise known as Mo. The name of the film is City of Dreams. It highlights labor trafficking here in the United States and in Los Angeles, and I am a proud ambassador of this film. Today, I welcome the director, Mo, onto our podcast. Let's get started. Welcome to the podcast, Mo. Thank you for being on here.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit. We'll talk about the film. We'll talk about the issue, but I also wanted to talk about you. From what I've read, and it's kind of funny because there's two different stories here. So one is that you're born in India, raised in Hong Kong.
That's right.
And Los Angeles. And then I read another one that you were born in India, raised in London, and live in LA.
Yeah. Okay, so it's a little... Okay. It's confusing. So my parents were living in Hong Kong, and my dad said my son has to be born in the motherland. So they went back from Hong Kong to India. I was born, and then they came back to Hong Kong. So I never lived in India. I didn't grow up in India, but he wanted me to be born in India. And then I came back to Hong Kong, and then he passed away, and we moved to London. And I went to the London School of Economics. I went to college in London, and then I moved to LA in 2001. So it's it's India, Hong Kong, London, and Los Angeles.
Fair enough. And what is your ethnicity, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 100% Indian. My mother and father are both from Mumbai.
You are a writer, you are a director, you are a producer, and you created this amazing film called City of Dreams that was originally called Bonded. Is that correct? Can you explain to me how that, tell me about sort of the origin of this story, if you don't mind. I'm sure you've been asked this 1,000 times.
Yeah. No. Totally cool. So what happened was I originally wrote a movie called The Little Messiah. That was about a kid in Pakistan. It was a much bigger story. It was about this kid who ends up becoming like a Gandhi figure. He lobbies for human rights in Pakistan, and he ends up getting killed, and Clinton, bans the import of goods from Pakistan until they change their labor laws. It was a true story. And I set it up with Mark Gordon, who produced Saving Private Ryan and Grey's Anatomy and all that. And it didn't get made for years. And then eventually I set it up with Irish Dreamtime, which is Pierce Brosnan's company. And his producing partner, who was kind of a mentor to me, she said, this stuff's happening in LA. And I was like, really? She said, yeah, the whole garment industry. So I started doing some research, and I found this case of 72 immigrants trapped in a residential location in El Monte, California. And that was the El Monte sweatshop case in 1995. That was a huge deal. And so I took the origins of my original script and sort of the El Monte case and a few other cases I researched, and that's how I put it together. And I had a really hard time with the title because it was about bonded labor, and I originally called it Bonded, and then Pierce Brosnan was like, hey, I want to do this. I want to play the cop with my son. And it was announced in 2010. Him and his son announced, it's still, the Rap announced it. And then he was like, I don't like the title because of the affiliation to Bond. You know what I mean? He was like Bonded. So then we started thinking of other titles, and I could never really figure out what to do with the title. I was like, all right, I'll figure it out eventually. And after I finished the movie, and in 2022, when I went through this period, and I talk about it a lot, where I finished the movie in 2022, summer, and nobody wanted to see it. And everyone was saying it's too dark, it's too intense, there's no superheroes, there's no werewolves, and it's like, how is this dark? It's shining a light on something dark. How is Narcos not dark and Euphoria not dark? These shows about kids doing drugs and getting raped is all great entertainment, and this is dark. So I had a really, really hard time, and I wasn't sure what to do. And the weird thing was I was getting meetings. I met with a bunch of very, very big studios and production companies that I won't name because they were like, hey, we love your film and we want to work with you, but we don't want to support this movie. And it was kind of like, okay. And finally, I was pretty depressed. I went to yoga one day and I was in the changing room and there was this older gentleman and he came out of the shower and he was completely naked and he was sort of bent over and he was like, "Hey kid, can you get me a towel?" And I don't know why I said it in that moment. I said, "Yeah, I can do that, but I need you to watch my movie or I'm not getting the towel." And he did end up watching my film. And he turned out to be the producer of Taxi Driver, The Sting, Close Encounters. He brought Guillermo del Toro to America, and he was completely taken by the film. He became an executive producer. His name's Michael Phillips, and he was the first one that said, you're going to get a lot of criticism about this not being commercial and it being dark. And he said, it's going to start with the title. And he was like, get rid of that title because bonded just implies this sort of dark underbelly. And I'm like, great. I'm like, I'm open to it. You got a title? And he's like, why don't you call it Dreamer? And I was like, that's a really good title because it's like that whole Obama's Dreamer Act. And then at the same time, the kid is a dreamer in the movie. Like he's somebody that's you learn about him through his dreams. So I changed the title to Dreamer and we actually went to the Mammoth Film Festival under the title Dreamer and we won the Mammoth Film Festival. And after that, we connected with this guy who was Biden's LGBTQ and Latin advisor. He was a senior advisor to Biden for many years. And his name's Mo Vela, very cool guy. And he sort of had a Zoom with me and he was like, do not call the movie Dreamer. And I was like, why? And he's like, because you're basically pointing a finger at the left and they're not going to support it if you call it Dreamer. And the right isn't going to want to support it because they don't like dreamers. And you're making it political because people think of Dreamer as a political. And I had no concept of this. I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. Right. So I talked to the studio and they were like, yes, this guy's right. This could end up getting political. And so then it was like, okay, how about City of Dreams? Because all these people in the movie are dreamers and the city of LA is known as the City of Dreams. And then it sort of morphed into that. So that's the long-winded story about the title.
The behind the scenes story of how it went from Bonded to this. And I get why Pierce Brosnan didn't want Bonded because he's so known for that. But it's actually a great title because of, slavery bondage and generational slavery and all of that. But your story takes place in LA, which is what I love so much about it. Because people don't know it's happening here. They have no clue. They have no idea. I think first is, for my audience, if you haven't seen this, the movie is called City of Dreams. It is in theaters everywhere. It's gotten phenomenal critical praise. It's just taking the world by storm. Mo, I so relate to your story because, I had my own show, right? And we are doing it. We're doing it as a film. But for a while there, it was this TV show. And it was all about my life and undercover, human trafficking and sex trafficking and all of that stuff that I've done. And we pitched to everybody. And I'm telling you, they would cry in the pitches. And I'm like, oh, absolutely, for sure. They're buying this. Absolutely crying, thanking me for the pitch and all of this stuff. And then they would be like, no, it's too dark. It's too dark. It's too dark. And I was like, how is this the same exact question? How is this too dark? Look at Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
And all the rape and all the this and all the that happened, which is one of my favorite shows in the world. How is that fine? Thank God we're ending up doing it as a movie and we're about to start shooting. But Sound of Freedom came out and proved that there is an audience for this and people do want to know about this issue.
Right.
And they do care about this issue.
That's right.
So you are sort of the second foray into this. And I'm so, so, so pleased that you focused on America.
Right.
So pleased. Okay, so my next question, which I think I know the answer to, but I don't know if my audience does. Have you ever seen any of this firsthand?
I haven't seen anything firsthand. Like I haven't gone on a raid or anything like that, but I did meet with some of the survivors of the El Monte case years ago, Anti-Sunni, the Thai group, and I talked to them. And of course I did a ton of research, but what really informed me was I connected with a guy called Ruben Rosales, and Ruben is the director of the Wage and Hour Division for the Department of Labor for the entire West Coast. And he started educating me. When I first wrote the script, I got in touch with him before I started shooting, which was like in 2019. He said, do you know that this is getting worse. And at the time, it wasn't being reported in the mainstream media. And he was sending me cases, a bunch of kids trapped in a garage in the Bay Area, and they're making cabinets that end up at, hotel chains that are very well known in our country. And it just sort of started getting worse and worse and worse. And in 2021, he called me and he said, this is going to break now in the mainstream media, because what's happened is all these kids cross the border and we process them. And we would ask a kid, hey, where are you going? And he'd say, I'm going to Uncle Juan in Alabama. And great. We give him a meal. We pay to transport him to Uncle Juan. And in 6 months, we realized we've sent 900 kids to Uncle Juan, and he's not an uncle. He's a trafficker. And so
100%.
For me, that, getting cases from him and sort of understanding that, I purposely stayed away from it. And I'll tell you why. Because I didn't want to make a documentary. I said, I don't want this to be I want it to be a fantasy. I want it to be like Slumdog Millionaire. Why? Because I want people that normally wouldn't watch this kind of stuff to watch it. There's no point making something that sort of talks to the converted, because you're only going to go see a documentary about this issue if you're interested in. But if I make kind of a thriller, more of a genre type film, then I can go beyond the audience of just people that are interested in this issue.
Very, very true. And my question was sort of leading into something that you mentioned at that talk that I went to, which is that your dad worked in a sweatshop.
Yeah. So my dad at the age of 7 was kicked out of his home, and he had to cross the border from Pakistan to India because of the partition. And what happened was, obviously his father was a public defender in that area, and they didn't have a lot of money. Like my mom's family were entrepreneurs, so they were also kicked out of their home from the same little province that my dad's family was from. But they were sort of okay. They were middle class. My dad had to work in, as a T-boy in sweatshop type of conditions. And he eventually ended up breaking out of that. But there was a period of his life where he had to go through that. And I've said this many times, like, the movie in many ways explores him at different stages of his life. He is Jesus, he's Cesar, he's El Jefe, he's all of those characters.
It's very clear in the film that there is this deeper meaning between our villain.
Yeah.
And we see the villain in such a accurate way, very accurate. But also, wait a minute, there's a moment of humanity here I don't understand. And I think what the things that I've seen, it always like tweaks me when I see the most inhumane trafficker doing the most horrific things, and they're like nice, and making jokes, and you want them to look, like with boils on their face and skin falling off and like the typical, and they don't, and it's always shocking. So I really love that you showed that, and I have to say I'm so glad that you. This is going to sound odd, right? So hear me out. But I'm really very glad that you put in that degree of violence, because that is what it is. And I understand that some people don't want to see that, or it's too harsh, but it's like, look, these kids are facing this every single day. If they can face it and live through it and still fight, the least we can do is put some of our attention for 2.5 hours on this subject and spread the word. That's the very least that we can do. So I was so glad, because I see it sugar-coated sometimes,
Yeah.
And I understand it's unpalatable, and I understand that it's a lot to confront, but if the kid can confront it, we certainly have to.
100%.
So for my audience who hasn't seen it yet, don't let that turn you off, because you do this beautiful sort of fantasy of our lead character, and when this horrific stuff is happening to him, you do this amazing parallel with soccer.
Yeah.
And his goals and his dreams as this inhumane thing is happening. Can you talk about talk about that, because it's so beautifully well done.
Well, I'm really glad you said that. Obviously, I wish everybody thought the way you did, because you're my audience. Like, you get what I was trying to do. And ironically, the violence in the movie is way less than what really happens. And I didn't know that until, Mira Sorvino, who joined as an executive producer, she's really involved in trafficking. Like, she's been involved for a long time. It's her cause too. And she educated me. She was like, Mo, that scene where that older kid burns him with the iron, right? She was like, I remember talking to a trafficking survivor saying that they had burned me, a woman. She was pregnant, and the trafficker had burned her with an iron on her genitals and then burned her baby, her 2-year-old baby, in front of her. And like, imagine if that was in a movie, everyone would just run out. Like this was so attenuated to what really happens. And for me, what I wanted to do was I wanted to tell the story of a character that was in many ways representative of the world. And I thought, all these kids, they don't have a voice. So let's make him not have a voice, and let's have him reclaim his voice at the end. And what I wanted to do was show, well, then how do I show who he is and what he wants and how he suffers? And that was in his dreams and in his nightmares. And that's where that came from. And originally, it wasn't soccer. When he first came across the border, the trafficker gave him a brochure for a very famous theme park that I'm not allowed to mention because we didn't get the rights to you, because I found that particular theme park is a hotbed for traffickers. When I met with LAPD, they said that more kids get kidnapped at that place than anywhere else in the world. Like, cause that's just, but so much money is spent on suppressing that you don't know about it. And I wanted it to make, but that was never going to happen. And then I thought, well, in Mexico, like, soccer is everything. And when I went and visited Mexico and I started scouting, all the kids, even in the villages, were wearing soccer jerseys of their local teams. And so that's where I thought, oh, this is actually really cinematic, and this is going to actually help me make the movie look even bigger than it is. And that's why I leaned into the soccer.
It was so smart, and you really understand that this father, because you're like, in the beginning, you see this older, I believe it's his father, correct? Mm-hmm. Right? You see the father, hand over his kid, and you're like, wait, why? And that happens all the time to, low-income families all over the place, not just Mexico, but all over the place.
Everywhere.
Where they're trying to give a better life for their children, and then they unknowingly hand their child over to a trafficker, and the child ends up in horrific conditions. And you really did tell a lot of the facts through this story, which is what I love so much. And my first thought when I was watching it, and in one of the interviews, you're like, look, everybody focuses on sex trafficking, not so much on labor trafficking, which is true. And I focus on sex trafficking. I am one of those, right?
Right.
And when I was watching the girls in there, I was like, there's no way these girls would end up untouched. There's no way. And then, of course, enter our sex trafficker.
Right.
So first of all, I love that you made her a female.
Yeah.
Because it is the thing that breaks my heart is when I come across and meet these female traffickers, because it's such a betrayal of everything that you are to do this. And so was that a conscious choice to make her female and to make her, I believe she's white?
Yeah. So originally it was a male. And then I started reading, and what I thought was interesting was, what if I made her a victim herself? Like, she started out, and that's why when, she pulls up her arm, you see that her entire forearm is burned off herself. And you can tell she's gone through stuff. There were more scenes with her later that I had to obviously cut out for the editing, but there's a scene where she's in a hotel room with one of the girls she took, and it was intercut with the police breaking in at the end. And she literally takes off all her clothes, and she's burned head to toe. And on her back, I literally created these 2 burns that looked like her wings had been cut off, like she was a fallen angel, like she was Lucifer. Wow. And I really liked that image. And she confronts this little girl, and it reminds her of her, and she ends up breaking down and crying. But it was so intense. Everyone was like, that's got to go. That's got to get out of the movie. So I had to cut that. I know. But I thought it was interesting that she would be, it would be a woman that had been abused herself and was sold into slavery and had now rised up through the ranks and become a recruiter.
Yep.
I thought that's more interesting a character than just some evil guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. And that is more the case in the United States.
Right.
That's how you get these female traffickers, is they've now joined the bad guys, for
Right.
lack of a better word.
And in Sound of Freedom, the main trafficker was a female. Like
Yes.
that in that case, in that whole Tim Ballard, like in
she
his
just
whole,
got convicted too.
I saw that.
The Santee Alley, is that Santee Alley? That shoot? I thought so.
Yeah.
So guys, I have to tell you, that's one of the most phenomenal chase scenes. You must have rehearsed that forever. I mean, this chase scene goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit? Because I was like, man, I hope you tipped your Steadicam guy, because he did a great job.
Well, no Steadicam. It was handheld, actually.
No.
Oh yeah, it was handheld.
It was handheld.
It was handheld. There was no,
Okay,
so we couldn't afford Steadicam. Like there was no,
right.
We didn't have Steadicam. We had a great operator from Mexico, and what we did is I went down there with an iPhone and with a kid who was a friend's son, who was like 17 or 18, and his dad. And they ran, and we found all the places where we would make. It took about a week of like every day going down there going, okay, no, what if we went from here to here, and then we wiped here and we cut here. So it took about a week it was probably the most fun thing to shoot. But the most interesting thing about it, and the thing that informed me, was while I was rehearsing it, I had this teenager in a Mexico soccer jersey that was dirty and torn, and we made him look, and he was a Mexican kid, and he was running, and his dad was chasing him, and not one person stopped to go, hey, are you okay, or what's going on? People were trying to sell the kids stuff. And in fact, the moment in the movie where that guy goes, hey, $9.99 for this fanny pack and you'll be the coolest cucumber on campus, that actually happened. So I rewrote the whole chase and was like, this is way worse than I thought. People just don't give a shit. People don't care.
Until people like yourself make a story and make a film that makes people care, that puts it in their face and goes, this is happening. Because it is so much easier to, I don't want to, I don't like it, and just close your eyes.
Yeah.
And I get it. I so get it. I've been doing this long enough to understand, especially moms and dads, it's a lot to confront. And I get it. But it is everywhere. And these people are counting, and I say it all the time, they're counting on the good people that don't know about it to do something about it. Because all the bad guys know everything about it. So I have to ask you, because I read this headline that said, or I think it was on a podcast you did, it said you used your mom's life insurance.
That's right.
Can you tell that story?
Yeah. I couldn't. I mean, like you know how you talked about, you went and you pitched it. Like I had the script for years. I tried for years to get it made. And it was interesting when Pierce Brosnan was attached to it. I also had Alfred Molina, who I love that guy. He's such a great actor. I had him as El Jefe, and it was a $3 million budget. And it was almost impossible to, like, even with those two cast members, to get the money. So my mom, I kind of left LA. In 2011, my mom got stage 4 bone marrow cancer, and she lived in London. And between 2011 and 2017, all I did was travel the world and go to these alternative cancer clinics with her. And she went into remission twice. Like I basically got a degree in cancer. I had to learn everything about bone marrow cancer. And then she passed in 2017. And of course, for about a year, my mom was like my best friend. Like she was my life. So it was very difficult for me to recover from that. And when she passed away, what was strange was I had nothing else. Like my brother's married and he has kids. I'm not married. I don't have any kids. I don't have any other sort of family. I'm not really close to my brother. So it put me in this kind of like, oh my God, I'm alone. Like, do I really need to be here? Like maybe my time is up, and like that was going through my mind a lot. And And then I don't know, like her life insurance came through and I was like, you know what? The hell with it. I'm just going to take all of this money and I'm going to use it to start the financing. And then a friend came and said, well, if you're going to put in this money, then I'll match you. And then I found other people, and that's kind of how it came together. It took about, 8 months after I decided, which is not a very long time. It can take a lot longer than that to sort of get all the money and go into production. So yeah, I definitely feel, she's a big part of this, and she's guided this whole journey and process.
What drew you to this subject and confronting something this dark?
When I was 12, my neighbor brought over this movie, and it was about this boxer who gets a shot at the heavyweight championship of the world, and he ends up getting a beating through the whole movie. And in the 14th round of the fight, he gets knocked down for the 100th time. And his trainer tells him to stay down, but he gets up and he says, hey, let's keep going. And as a 12-year-old kid, I'm watching Rocky get up on his feet, and I'm going, why did my father not teach me that? Like, why didn't he teach me never to give up? Because that seems to me like a much more important lesson than marrying an Indian girl and getting straight A's. I realized that film and films in general, they shaped me as a human being and they changed my life. And I thought, if there was a Jesus and there was a Buddha and there was a Krishna and they were alive today, they'd be making movies, because it's the fastest way to affect mass consciousness. Obviously, the story was shocking to me that there's labor trafficking in America and that sweatshops are in America, not just in India and China. But I was also thinking, like, no one would give me any money. And it was like a smaller budget. Like, I couldn't have made some of the earlier stuff that I wrote, that I sold, were these giant movies, and no one was giving me $50 or $80 million. So I had to find the story that satisfied me creatively, that had some kind of mission, had something to say.
Since we're going to be wrapping up, I want to have my audience understand what a beautiful film this is. What is your hope by telling this story? What are you hoping comes out of this?
Well, again, the story was designed for emotional impact. It was designed so that at the end of it, it breaks your heart. It breaks you and it makes you angry. Like, I was hoping people would get inflamed watching the movie and say, how do we end this? How do we make this stop? Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I have every solution. I'm not a politician. I know we have a problem. I know awareness of the problem is important. I know getting people motivated to do something about the problem and come up with solutions. I have one simple solution that I've presented many, many, many times, but it's unpopular because it'll work and it'll put corporations on the firing block, which is, I used to work on Wall Street, and every Wall Street trading floor and office needs a compliance officer. That's just law. An SEC compliance officer has to be in every Goldman Sachs trading office, right? So if there was a law that said every single company in America needed to have a third-party compliance officer in every third-party site, otherwise there would be severe financial and criminal penalties, the same way there is in Wall Street, I think that would be the beginnings of a solution. But again, I think we need our best minds, our best lawmakers to all sit down and say, how do we deal with this? And I think it's going to be a collective uprising. Look, 100 years ago, there was things happening in this country that aren't happening anymore. And it's because people said enough. I've heard, other producers talk about Uncle Tom's Cabin, that book is what led to people, fighting for the emancipation of slaves. You know what I'm saying? It was a piece of art.
Yes.
So again, Abraham Lincoln is given the credit for that, and he should be, but it started with a piece of art. So I think the 100%. Piece of art is created to sort of make people think and inspire people and also inflame people and get them to be emotionally motivated.
I want to mention one thing. For transparency in supply chains should be mandatory.
Right.
It should be a federal law, period. So I couldn't agree with you more on that. I want to tell you what made me go, wait, what? Is when the byline of this film, City of Dreams, the byline is a story of, there's 12 million children enslaved in the world. This is the story of one who fought back.
Right.
That's what motivated me. And besides wanting to hear, because I do know about it, but I want to see the stories of resilience.
Yeah.
That when this lead character stands up and no one can beat him down. He's given every excuse to become a victim, to hide and to give up. And he does not. I would highly argue that this is also a film about human resilience.
Absolutely.
And strength of a human being and the human spirit.
It is.
So
it's a hero's journey.
Yeah.
It's a hero's journey.
Yes. I just want my audience to understand that this is not a heartbreaking, because people wait, I don't want to see another heartbreaking story that makes you miserable. No, this is a story about the one kid who fought back, who refused to be beaten down and refused to give up. And that is what I am always amazed at when I meet with a survivor or go into these situations, is that you can't kill the human spirit.
That's right.
They fight back.
Absolutely.
And it's absolutely beautiful. So please, I want my audience to know that. Just talk a little bit about that.
What I thought was interesting was this kid lost his voice when the umbilical cord was cut and his mother died. And really what the story is about is a kid who doesn't have a voice, who through these struggles, he ends up in a cave, literally in a tomb, where, after immense suffering, he's able to confront this trauma from the past and realize that, his mother's death is what led to the loss of his voice. And he gets his voice back because, again, when we transcend and when we witness what actually caused our traumas, we're able to overcome them. And that to me was the crux of the story. There is no movie without the boy getting his voice back. So at the end, when he does stand up and he screams in the trafficker's face, like that to me was supposed to be, that's why I made the movie, for that moment. Mm-hmm. That's the climax of the film. And yes, it's a classic hero's journey. And I feel like all the greatest movies of our time tell those stories, whether it's Star Wars or Rain Man or, and we don't make that many of them anymore. We just don't tell those great heroes' journeys anymore, and I miss them, which is why I wanted this to be rooted in that rather than more of a docudrama.
Mo, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Any last words, or thank you just so much? Really,
no,
truly.
I'm really grateful to be here, and I'm really grateful for everything you do and how much you fought to be sort of a shining light in this area. You brought a lot of light to trafficking. So thank you so much. It's an honor to be on the podcast.
Thank you so much. Right back at you. Thank you for listening to the Marisol Nichols podcast. And please do not forget to click like and subscribe. And a big shout out to WD Hahn for our theme song, Something's Gotta Change. See you next time.